Clark didn't reckon on Michael Crick.
Cornered at last, the man who's kept an astonishingly low profile, if not a slim one. Ken Clark, most unusually for a candidate, has taken a sudden dislike to cameras.
Good morning, Mr. Clark.
Oh, you know perfectly well I'm not going to give you an interview. I'm going to talk about...
What's that? You've been gagged?
No, I'm not being gagged, no. I prefer to have a sensible election with my constituents rather than a foolish one.
All the previous elections have been foolish ones, have they?
No, perfectly sensible election going on here.
I'm sure our candidate, who is over there, will give you an interview if Mr. Clark will not.
Well, William Hague says this is a referendum on the euro. Is there any difference between what you believe on the euro and what the gentleman over there, Kenneth Clark, believes?
Well, as I understand what Ken believes, he is broadly in agreement with Liberal Democrat views on Europe, but we disagree with him on the whole range of other policies. At the end of the day, he wants to see William Hague in Downing Street. We don't.
But Mr. Clark wouldn't discuss Hague, Europe or anything.
What I would like you to do is to go away and allow me to campaign properly in Rushcliffe, where I'm persuading people to vote Conservative next week.
Are you asking them to save the pound? Is that part of your campaign?
No, I'm trying to stop foot-in-the-door journalists getting in the way of my campaigning with my constituents.
Thank you very much. There aren't any doors for quite a long way around.
No, you're just stopping speaking to anybody else.
His team, however, were rather more forthcoming.
My own personal opinion, I see us going into the euro, and
you want
I am a pro-European.
Right.
But
it's difficult though in the party, isn't it? Where most people are against the euro, want to keep the pound.
That is a valid point.
Which one are you for? Saving the pound, or are you for the euro?
I'm for the next 5 years, saving the pound.
Right. And Mr. Clark doesn't say anything about that in this leaflet of his. It's a bit strange, that, isn't it? It's a big issue. The leader of the Conservative Party says it's a referendum on the euro, and there's no mention of it at all in here, as far as I can see.
Well, perhaps you need to go and speak to him then.
Do you regard it as a referendum on the euro, as Mr. Hague does?
I'm campaigning in Rushcliffe, trying to get people to vote Conservative.
You've said that already. I wonder why you don't answer these questions.
You keep repeating a lot of silly questions, which you know.
Well, they're very pertinent questions, and you know they are.
They're not pertinent
questions.
Of course they are. They're not pertinent questions. You're behaving in a totally cynical way, insisting on delaying me in my campaigning when you've been told repeatedly that I am not going to give you an interview.
The young Labour hopeful seemed almost unsure whether beating Clark would be a good thing.
It is sad that there's no room for people like Ken in today's Conservative Party. They've turned their back on him. He's been cast adrift by the party.
So wouldn't it be better if he won then?
Not at all, because the people of Rushcliffe need that investment in schools and hospitals, and they won't get that.
Nor, whatever our questions to Mr. Clark, would we get more than one answer.
Do you think that Mr. Hague's been running a good campaign? Has he got the emphasis right?
I'm campaigning to try to get my constituents to vote Conservative on Thursday, and you are getting in my way, and I prefer to talk to my constituents about the things that actually concern them.
Do you think Mr. Hague's has run a good campaign as you would have done?
I'm campaigning at Rushcliffe, try and get people to vote Conservative, and I've told you I'm not going to give you an interview.
Vote UK Independence Party on Thursday.
The UKIP has another Ken, an old Tory drinking chum.
Ken Clark and me have been, well, distant friends for a long time. I used to vote for him one time.
Why not anymore?
I always said to him, even back in the days when I used to vote for them, he belongs in the Labour Party. He does not belong in the Conservative Party of today, and he didn't back in those days either.
I mean, there was a time when you were never off our screens. You never turned down an interview, and now you seem frightened of microphones.
I don't regard an invitation to an interview as a royal command. I decide for myself.
There was a time when you seem to regard it as a royal command.
Your interview seems to be a particularly frivolous one, so it is getting in the way of my campaigning.
What do you say? We're from Newsnight. Are you going to be voting for Mr. Clark?
Do you not recognise the Newsnight style?
Why won't you be voting for him?
I don't think I'd dare, because my brother's the agent for the Socialist Alliance.
Oh, I
see. He'd kill me.
Be careful, he's the television equivalent of the Sun.
Never have I been so insulted, or perhaps honoured. Yet in belting up, his wife Gillian clearly agrees.
Mrs. Clark, is it nice to have your husband at home this time?
Yes, very. It means less work for me. I did a lot of campaigning last time when he had to be away because he was Chancellor.
So has he been told to shut up? He's not doing any interviews?
Nobody tells my husband to shut up, but he has decided...
Not even you?
He has decided he does not wish to give interviews which he considers will be 100% mischief-making.
So, not much from her old man, but more from Mrs. Clark than we've heard from Fionn Haig during the whole campaign.
Michael Crick in the Newsnight style. And you can find a full list of the candidates standing in Rushcliffe on BBC News Online. Well, Stephen Norris, as Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, wouldn't you be delighted if Kenneth Clarke left his constituency and went out on the stump supporting other people in the party?
Yeah, of course, and he's doing a terrific job. I'm not the slightest
But he's not out
doubt.
his constituency.
I just think he decided Michael Crick was not going to get past him.
I think he decided that he was...
This is a bit of the sort of, you know, the unstoppable force and the immovable object. I thought that was probably one of the best pieces of television I've seen in years, to be honest with you.
Why haven't we heard the former Chancellor talking about his support for the euro during this campaign?
I would say for a very perfectly straightforward reason, and you know it and I know it and most of the people watching will know it straight away. Ken clearly has a difference of view on the way that the party should approach the euro, but he accepts the fact that not only did William Hague make his position clear, but that the party overwhelmingly backed the position which William Hague took. As a result, he feels, I think, really rather sensibly, that the less he says at this time, the better, because actually mischief-making is, I suspect, what would be the natural temptation for any decent journalist, and he's not about to play the game. Don't blame him.
We hear that possibly Kenneth Clarke and Chris Patten will come out the day after the election and not only talk about the euro, but also say the whole slant of the Conservative campaign was wrong because it should not have been about keeping the pound. It should have been about health and education and all these things. Was it the wrong tack?
Not in my experience. I mean, I've been campaigning in a whole lot of places around the country, and it's always interesting to know what issues are actually volunteered to you on the doorstep before you have a chance to tell people what you think is important. And interestingly enough, in quite a few places, the euro, you know, I had a wonderful thing about, you know, will you vote for our candidate? Well, that depends. What does it depend on, madam? Will you keep the pound? Marvellous, this woman's from Central Casting. But, you know, I mean, the fact is that Ken there takes a different view, doesn't want to make trouble, doesn't want to allow journalists to make mischief, and I think actually saw him off rather well.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, sightings of Kenneth Clarke outside his constituency may have been rarer than snow in the Sahara, but his former leader has been positively flaunting herself to the electorate in the past 2 days. She doesn't grant many interviews, but she was prepared to give us a piece of her mind. Ladies and gentlemen, the Baroness.
Good evening. Now, why am I here? By the way, that is a rhetorical question. I do not expect an answer. As I said to Mr. Hague, William, if I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. No, I am here to offer you a warning. We should be afraid, be very afraid of a Labour landslide. An elective dictatorship is never acceptable, as I was saying to my good friend General Pinochet only the other night. Because, as one of my predecessors observed, unlimited power is apt to corrupt the minds of those who possess it. Yes, yes, Tony Blair looks friendly enough in shirt sleeves. Sometimes, though, a little over-friendly. You know, the sort of man that would call John the Baptist Jack. But the danger is still there, and we can never quite admire a man who was originally a socialist. I mean, look at John Prescott. John Prescott actually likes fish and chips. Well, as long as the fish is well battered. And don't even think about voting Liberal, because they're all communists. I mean, have you seen Charles Kennedy's hair? It's completely red. Mind you, I must say this, I do admire Shirley Williams because she is so economical. Do you know what she does with her old clothes? She wears them. Now let me say once again, be afraid, be very afraid, because who is going to take over, who might take over the Conservative Party if there were a Labour landslide? Well, let me tell you, they're already scheming behind William's back. First of all, there's Kenneth Clarke, who insists on paying for his hush puppies in euros. Then there's Michael Portillo, who's practically Spanish. And then there's Anne Widdecombe, who's practically a woman. No, no, the Conservative Party could never stand for that. So, who are we left with? Steve Norris? I don't think so. No, be afraid. be very afraid. The pound is in danger. The British are in danger. You are in danger. We need to bring back to life some great hero from history. Nelson, Churchill, Thatcher. Now, if you ask me very nicely, I think I would. I never lost an election. Got the message?
Lady Thatcher. You may remember the only time Mrs. Thatcher ever showed any emotion was when she was forced out of Downing Street. But in the past 4 years, politics has become a quite different performance. In the last of her 3 films on the Blair years, Madeleine Holt demonstrates how the stiff upper lip has been injected with a tremble.
Cheers, then tears.
Goodbye, England's rose.
Within months of the creation of Britain's new political landscape, it was deluged by mass grief. The tone of the new parliament was set by the death of a princess and a prime minister's reaction.
Called out to our country.
Tony Blair seemed to almost appropriate Diana, skillfully connecting with public feelings.
I feel like everyone else in this country today, utterly devastated.
People are still arguing about the public reaction to the death of Princess Diana, necessary catharsis or mass hysteria. But there seems to be more of a consensus that since then our political leaders have wanted to be seen as more compassionate, caring figures. The Blair years haven't just been about modernising, but emoting. We've never had it so touchy-feely. That's nice to me.
If anything happened to me, you'd soon find a new leader. But my kids wouldn't find a new dad.
What can I say to make you feel this?
The thing is, you forget how tiny they are.
What can I do to get you there?
My son is basically a good kid.
It wasn't just Tony who felt our pain. Even Peter Mandelson, long caricatured as a steely-hearted Machiavelli, showed a vulnerable side in a television interview. And showing your feelings wasn't just the preserve of New Labour. When Paddy went, there was hardly a dry eye in the House. But his successor trounced him with honours at doing cuddly folksy.
I've been fortunate enough to come from a close, caring family in a close, caring community. And as well as being farmers, my parents are also musicians.
Michael Portillo's astonishing transformation showed the Conservatives were feeling it too. Here he is in 1995.
Don't mess with Britain.
And here's the year 2000 version.
And we are a party that values people for what lies inside them.
To an expert in advertising, it looks like savvy marketing.
I think they're learning, as we've learned over many years, that you cannot really persuade someone merely by using rational arguments. You need to wrap those in some telling and some compelling, emotional message. And I think this is particularly important in areas where there is product parity, which is in areas where there's not much difference between one product or another.
Listening to your heart isn't just influencing presentation, but policy. More than a feeling. The campaign group Antidote promotes emotional literacy, being able to recognise what you're feeling so it doesn't interfere with what you're thinking. The Trade Minister, Patricia Hewitt, is a member. Earlier this year, she said emotional literacy should be given as much time and importance in schools as reading and writing. 80 local education authorities have pilot schemes up and running. I went to see one of the founders of Antidote, Diana's former therapist, Susie Orbach. She's delighted some of her ideas have been taken seriously, but is otherwise cynical about these new political outpourings.
It's
Well, I think we see politicians playing the emotional card all over the show, but it's a kind of an emotionalism, if you like, rather than taking seriously people's real passions, real concerns about the state of Britain today. And it's playing with them in I think, a very cheap way. So the whole Europe debate, or the pound debate, is about emotions. It isn't actually really about the political issues involved.
For the writer George Walden, politics and sentimentalism simply don't mix.
It is a form of condescension because you're sort of playing down to people's feelings. So it is a form of pissing on the masses, really. And it is also rather dangerous for the political process, as Blair is discovering, because if you sow a form of irrationalism and you know, feeling rather than thinking, look at the fuel strike. I mean, people's attitudes were completely irrational there. You know, they want low indirect taxes, low direct taxes, massive public spending. And so I think that Blair is onto a dangerous one with this emotionalism, and maybe he's coming off it a bit.
Why education is a passion.
Well, not much sign of that yet. Maybe the best we can do is remind ourselves that it could be worse. Gut-wrenchingly worse.
Madeleine Holt. Joe Klein, is emotion a legitimate political tool?
Well, I think the dirty little